downtown area. The rest of it, here's UT Brownsville, looks pretty much like what we would see around here, except for the palm trees, the palmettos. This is the Valley Baptist Medical Center. And then we headed to McAllen, about, I believe, 30 miles away, where we went to the station there. I've already spoken about that. Then we headed to Laredo, down US 83. And there we noted numerous DPS troopers working diligently, detaining, inspecting, and enforcing the law. And we're paying about $1 million per week for this surge, and officers are coming from around the state. It's required, it's not an option. One interesting thing I did see is at one intersection we stopped at, I looked to the left there and I saw this aerostat, or a tethered blimp, which they used for remote cameras to detect people crossing a large rural area, agricultural area, and then they look for the people as they travel different directions.
David,
yes?
maybe you can cover this, but when a DPS officer encounters one of these people that are illegal, what do they do with them?
They basically turn them over to the United States Customs and Border Patrol agents. Now, if they're conducting a criminal activity, I mean, there'll be other issues involved, but that's my understanding.
Not considered a criminal activity across the border?
Well, it's a civil penalty in most cases. It's a federal misdemeanor to illegal cross it. In some instances, it can be a felony. The problem is most of the time they don't catch them in the river. They don't catch them crossing the river. They catch them in Texas or the United States, and it's a difficult issue to pursue in a court. We'll come back to, I'm sure, more of these questions in a moment. Down there on the border, there are large corporations and their distribution centers. It's hard to see them, but one of these is Panasonic. And so it's a substantial international commercial area for there. We arrived at Laredo late in the day, but enough time to see the day workers returning home to Mexico on the right, people still coming to Texas on the left there. This was located a short walk from our hotel. And there we were walking around the square, and we visited with this patrol agent and a couple of others. It was interesting, not this one, but others. Basically, he said, ask the tough questions. You could tell they wanted you, they were glad you were there and concerned. Here's a view from our hotel window. It's hard to see, but we're looking over into Mexico. Down underneath the freeway, you can see the patrol unit on our side of the Rio Grande. They're playing soccer on the other side, and there are also Mexican military vehicles going down the road. And not only were they playing soccer, but we had a little exercise there in the middle of the courtyard of a hotel. That's my daughter, Hannah. And what's interesting there is I was there at this hotel, and I remember it distinctly when I was about 6 years old with my parents. I remember those archways, and it was a beautiful hotel. And this area of Texas and the continent was settled very early on. This church was established in the late 18th century. Then Thursday, we traveled on to Del Rio and up to Seminole Canyon State Park and the Marathon north of the Big Bend. But before I left the hotel there in Laredo, while I was eating breakfast, I met the commissioner, the U.S. Commissioner for Customs and Border Protection. And I asked him why he was there. He was there launching an ad campaign for Central Americans that they were putting on buses and placards in Mexico and in Central America. And these are the words that he used to describe the campaign. If you do get to the U.S., you will not be put on a path to citizenship. There is no permissio. It is dangerous. The second part of the message was, it is a dangerous journey and many lose their lives. or being sexually or are sexually assaulted. This man does work for our president's administration, but it was interesting to note here he supports the returning of children to the country of origin within 2 weeks, which is I think what the Corn and Quail bill is calling for. He's a personal friend of DPS Director Steve McCraw, and this was his 3rd trip to the border. From there we went on to Del Rio, and I did have to move quickly because I wanted to make my appointment. And we went up by Carrizo Springs, and as you travel north from any of the roads in the valley, you'll encounter a checkpoint where you're asked if you're a United States citizen. My dad, if you know my dad, you'll see a picture of him, but he usually wears a hat. And he joked with him and said he was from Iraq. We asked, what will you do if I say I'm from Iraq? But they laughed and moved on. But in Del Rio, right before you get to the Bend, the Big Bend, it's an old city and a beautiful city, though small. I met with the county judge there, Laura Allen. She was very gracious and hospitable. She's a Republican, but I was introduced to her by a Democrat who used to be in the House of Representatives in Texas, Pete Gallega, who's now serving in Congress. Next to her was the director of the Chamber of Commerce, and then the county sheriff. He didn't want his picture shown, so we doctored that a little bit. And there was the emergency management coordinator, D.A. Bagley. The county judge showed me around the city and took me to the port of entry, showed me the border fence and the large, well-beaten footpath right next to it, showing the ineffective nature of our investment in the fences, at least here in Texas, where we have a river as our border. From there, we actually went and had a lengthy lunch with several, including these 2 Border Patrol agents, who later then gave me a tour of the Del Rio Border Patrol Station. From there, we traveled to Seminole Canyon State Park, and which you enter the park a good ways from the border, but we went down beside Panther Creek to view the pictographs there, and the background there is actually the Rio Grande. That's where the creek runs into. Then on our way to Marathon, we noted one of the things we'd heard about. We saw one of the border agents dragging some tires or some other device behind his vehicle, and they do that so that they can see if there are any fresh footprints on the sandy roads. I couldn't get a hotel in Big Bend, so we stayed at the Historic Gage Hotel, which was very nice. The next day, on Friday, July 4th, we traveled down into the Big Bend National Park and on to Terlingua and to Lajitas. And there we are at the entrance to the park. It's a beautiful park. I really recommend it. I know Glenn Evans has been there. It's stark, but beautiful. It's full of lush plants. They just received rain, and it was bringing everything back to life. And of course, the rugged mountains you can see in a vast landscape. One of the chief landmarks there is Santa Elena Canyon, which we took a brief walk down to. And there's a view of it from the middle of a convergence of a creek. I forget the name of it. Big pardon?
Terlingua Creek.
Terlingua Creek, thank you. Then my daughter and I, we got as close to Mexico as we could. And my feet were really hurting. I have a tenderfoot. From there we went to Terlingua, and I visited with the fire chief there and EMS personnel. They were having a fundraiser, and I talked to them about, of course, our problem with respect to using the dedicated funds for volunteer fire departments for other purposes as well as border security. Then we rested and were refreshed at a hotel in Lajitas. The beautiful old hotel. It used to be a city. It was basically just a resort now. The next day, Saturday, July 5th, we went over to Big Bend Ranch State Park, and we hiked the Closed Canyon Trail and visited the Warnock Center at Big Bend Ranch State Park. This was a sunrise there, looking out from the house we stayed in. It was beautiful, but perhaps not quite as beautiful as the dark, starry, dark night and the beautiful skies that we saw lit up the night. Here's the Rio Grande, Lajitas, Texas on the left, and Lajitas, Mexico on the right. If you look carefully, you can see what's left of the little town there. They used to cross the 30-yard span of the river there, but now it's illegal to cross there, and they have to go about 40 miles either north to Presidio or south to the Boquilas crossing. Here's a better picture. Lajitas means small little rock or rocks. Flat rock, excuse me. There on our way to the closed canyon, and we took a picture from the big hill overlooking there. We did a little gymnastics. I was okay at that instance, but another one I had to go grab my daughter. There we are in the closed canyon. There's the house we stayed in. The far mountains, so basically on the right, are Mexico. It's hard to tell though, but the ones on the left are Texas. A beautiful pavilion there at the hotel where my parents stayed. On Sunday, we actually went back into Big Bend, went back to the east over to Boquilas Crossing before we headed west to Presidio. My wife and I saw the sunrise there. We couldn't get into the crossing. We're hoping to see that, but it was closed. The Border Patrol agent wasn't there yet. But we did go on down to an overlook. The crossing is actually in the far right. That's the legal crossing, in the far right corner. But there was another crossing, which I did see crossed while I was there, by a man, and he was attending this free trade zone, if you would. And if you look carefully on the right, you'll see him on a donkey. I saw him cross the river. But this down farther in the background there is a legal crossing that you can cross either by ferry. It's not much of a ferry. I think it's just a rowboat or a donkey, or you can wade. Anyway, went back all the way across the Big Bend and saw my cousin, who's a ranger at Big Bend Ranch State Park. Said goodbye to her. She and Representative Gallega had set up a lot of this part of the trip for us. On our way back, we traveled down the El Camino Real along the Rio Grande. It's one of the most scenic drives in America, said so by National Geographic. We saw these people canoeing down the river. Here's my dad looking west, or he's looking east, I'm looking west, and my daughter is, and with the Rio Grande in the background. And as we got close to Presidio, we noted the farmland, which is some of the oldest continuously farmed land in North America near Presidio. Here's their high school. Here's a view of the downtown area as we entered. That's the City Hall on the right. Here's the port of entry. Notice the sign on the right. Not too friendly statement, and they take that seriously, as we know our serviceman is down there who crossed over the border accidentally with a firearm. But we do have a friendly welcome sign on the Texas side. It doesn't say welcome to the United States. It says welcome to Texas. And you can see there one of the travelers coming over from Mexico. I passed by the Mexican consulate as we traveled north on US 67. If you keep going, you can go all the way, I believe, to Texarkana. But it's a long ways from there. We did see some immigrants. but they weren't from Mexico or Central America. They were from California. You can't read the license plate, but I did. Anyway, that's our trip with my family, immediate family, and my parents. Gives you a glimpse of what we saw. So it was a beautiful week, but it was sobering. I'd like now to just give you a quick recap of what I observed and thought about as I reflected on this. It almost took as much time to go over this, and I've recorded a lot of the conversations just to refresh my memory. But what's clear is we're not only overwhelmed by the numbers that are coming across, but we have a dysfunctional policy and practice. We are giving detainees, a promise to appear in an immigration court, and the detainees are interpreting that as a permission to enter the country. And who would you believe if you're in Central America and you receive a phone call? Would you believe the government advertisement, or would you believe your relative's phone call who said, I'm now received my permission to enter the United States? So I think the word of mouth advertising is being more effective, but I am thankful that they are telling people not to come and why, and it's a very dangerous journey. Many of the children were said, about 90% of the girls that came, and some of the staff at Los Fresnos told us, were sexually assaulted. Yes, some on the way, but many of them in their own homeland by relatives, neighbors, and they were fleeing those areas. Some of the dysfunctionality comes out here is we're not really checking to see that the relatives that we're releasing these children to are legal. And I'm concerned about the adequacy, especially when we're overwhelmed for medical screenings. And this is very ironic. The background checks, just a moment, take 2 years for legal entry into the country, but just take a few days for an illegal entry. Yes, sir.
I was going to ask, how are they defining relatives? What is a relative?
Well, yes, Kathy.
It's anyone who is directly related to the child, or they're turning them over to friends of the family, anybody that they can identify that has a connection to the family. Last case resort would be a foster family.
And these are for children, primarily from north of Central America, but a few from Mexico, that they're seeking to establish that they're fleeing terrible situations, that they have credible fear. I'm sorry. And one other thing I failed to mention is that we are repatriating same-day Mexicans that come across the border illegally. Hang on with me a minute. Didn't work yet. Try again.
Thank you, Apple.
That's Apple. I don't take credit for that. Are we there? Okay.
HP.
Anyway, some of the other dysfunctionality is that we, of course, end up providing K through 12 education for many of these children. And then they're not allowed to get a driver's license. And then if we use E-Verify, they won't be allowed to get a job. We have a very dysfunctional system. And furthermore, we attract illegal entry by providing a lot of free stuff. And that's not my words. Those are the words of people I interviewed along the border. One of the ways we do that is by creating a vacuum for workers by paying Americans not to work for almost 2 years. We need to change that.
Amen.
Now, our Constitution basically, though not as clearly as you might think, shows that this is a federal issue. Clearly in Article 1, Section 8 establishes that the federal government shall establish a uniform rule of naturalization. But then it deals with Article 1, Section 8 prohibited the federal government from prohibiting the states from admitting, of course at that time mainly slaves, from entering the country. the importation of slaves, but it also uses the word migration. Showed that the states did have some concurrent jurisdiction with respect to immigration, at least at that time, and that the role of the federal government was to prohibit. They couldn't prohibit until 1808. There are a couple of recent laws or acts in order that have been affecting the situation. One that was passed under President Bush in 2008. It's called the William Wilberforce Human Trafficking Law, and that allows people that establish credible fear that if they're seeking asylum, that we won't just turn them back to their predators, but they will seek to find that out, verify it, and find a better remedy. The other recent order that's affecting this is President Obama's executive order that under certain circumstances, people who qualify are not allowed or not forced to be deported from the country. And I don't have enough time or knowledge really to speak a whole lot about that right now. But that's really what's been causing the present, affecting what's going on now. The difference, of course, between President Bush and President Obama, one was passed by Congress pretty much unanimously and signed by the President, and the other policy and practice has been ordered by the Chief Executive Officer of our country, the President. There is a bill that I think goes a long way in addressing the issue. I'm not going to have time to get into it now. It's authored by our Senator Cornyn, of course a Republican, and a Democrat from the border of Laredo, who I've spoken with, Congressman Cuellar. It addresses determining the legal status of these people immediately, and not just trying to get rid of the promise to appear issue and allowing people to de facto really to disappear into our country. And I believe it speaks about adequate medical screening, and it also talks about employing the National Guard for certain purposes, not really military purposes, but to support law enforcement along the border, humanitarian relief, etc. Quickly, here's some ideas that I have for federal reform that I've thought about. First of all, we need to reduce the government freebies, which are many, at least for some people. Then we need to lower the restrictions for legal immigration and to facilitate law-abiding migrant workers. And I believe we should require legal status before we give someone birthright citizenship. And we also need to continue to increase law enforcement. The Border Patrol admits they need at least 700 more now. And that's one of the reasons why I think, though it's regrettably that we had to do it, the governor had to call for it, that the National Guard will help the Border Patrol, who 40% of them now are basically processing children and families. From the bottom working up, we need to give greater access to those federally protected lands. We need to, I'm going to move this so I don't lose it, excuse me. We need to keep in custody the detainees until we've actually determined credible fear, and make sure the people that we are releasing them to are not predators as well. We need to increase the number of immigration judges. We need to have swift hearings for the unaccompanied minors and family units. As far as state reform, probably the biggest thing that we've thought of with my office is requiring, before the children are allowed in our schools, that to make sure that they've complied with the federal promise to appear, and that they have legal status before they come to our schools. And of course, there's things we can do here in the state to reduce freebies for all. And North Carolina has done some of that. I'm seeking to study that legislation. I think there are a few things we can do on this issue as a state, though it's mainly a federal problem. Before I conclude and open this up, I just want to give a little bit of a perspective that sometimes is missing. The scripture says in Proverbs 14, verse 28, that in the multitude of the people is a king's honor, but in the lack of a people is the downfall of a prince. The greatness of our country is not just our natural resources, our oil and gas, etc., but it's our people. We have a lot of people actually renouncing more than ever their citizenship. And we have a declining birth rate in our country, 0.7%, that is not sustainable. Back in World War II, when we were fighting a desperate war on two continents, in Europe and in the Pacific Ocean, we didn't have many people to harvest the crops. And we allowed, and we were grateful for, migrant workers that are shown pictured here coming to work in South Texas. I took this picture of a slide presentation at the Palo Alto Battlefield National Park. I think we need to realize that people are important. We need to treat them humanely, and that there is a place to come legally. Other principles to consider that I've thought about, mercy and truth. Not just justice, mercy and truth preserve a king, and by loving kindness he upholds his throne, Proverbs 20:28. And then in Deuteronomy 10 and verse 18 and 19, and these aren't to be applied ipso facto directly to us. We are not Israel. We are not a theocracy. I want to make that very plain. But I do think there's principles of equity we can gain from the scriptures here. And there, God says himself that he administers justice for the fatherless and the widow and loves the stranger, and giving him food and clothing. Therefore, love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And then in Leviticus 19, he says, and if the stranger dwells with you in your land, you shall not mistreat him. The stranger who dwells among you, shall be to you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself. So what are the broad principles that I hold to? Well, first of all, I do think we need to secure and control the border. But I do think we need to avoid both extremes of closing the border, period, or making it completely open for anyone to come. I do not want to become like the Soviet Union and build a Berlin Wall where we wall people in and wall people out. Right. I believe in enforcement of the laws and the rule of law. But I also believe in freedom of travel and work. And we need to distinguish in our laws between serious crimes and lesser violations of order. There should be equal justice for the citizen and non-citizen. And we shouldn't reward violations of order, put them to the front of the line. I don't believe in amnesty. Then again, I don't believe in treating someone who's crossed an international border necessarily as a murderer or a thief. Think what you would do if your children were going to be raped by your uncle or your neighbor. What law would you violate if you were running out of a burning building? And would you pay attention to the crosswalk? Probably not. You just get across the street, you explain it to the judge. So I'm not justifying breaking of the law, but it's different than throwing a brick through a window and stealing property out of a store. And I do think there's a place, and always has been, for asylum in the United States from those fleeing violence and murder. And I do think there should be a legal path for naturalization or citizenship. And I'd like to conclude this before I open it up with this perspective. We are a nation of immigrants. Most of us can trace that ourselves. Our families came here. As one person, when I asked them, why are these immigrants coming? They said, for 3 reasons. For hope. For hope. For hope. Now, there are some coming to be dependent upon the government. But if we note the tablet that's in this Lady Liberty's hands there, it has inscribed upon it July 4th. It's a hope for most people of what we enjoy. Opportunity, freedom, but most of all, independence. And I do think we need to preserve that. And as we emphasize the necessity of border security and national security, but at the same time to remember that a people make us great. And a lot of good has come from those who've been hardworking, God-fearing, and who've obeyed the laws, and who make up this country, and from whose stock we've come from. Well, anyway, at this point, I would like to open it up. Here's a list of informal interviews. I'm not going to go through those, but those will be online. And I'm going to ask Kathy C. Michael has the microphone. And I know some of y'all are going to probably get here somewhere. If y'all, I'm going to try to answer these best I can. Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you very much. I see that y'all had a lovely family vacation, and I appreciate you taking the time to share that with us. Two of the things you said is that people are important, and yes, they are. And I believe that your constituents should come first when you talk about people are important. You also said you talked about mercy and truth, and the truth is this is illegal immigration. It's not. They're not coming legally. We're not, regardless of whatever the federal or state laws that are prohibiting them from doing that, they are coming here illegally. And this is not something that has happened, overnight. This is a well-planned, well-thought-out operation. I have done research that shows that our federal government has sent billions of dollars to these religious nonprofit agencies to house these illegal immigrants, and it's called the Illegal Alien Children Program. And I have all the documentation, the federal ID numbers. Last month, there were 92,009,000 Americans who were not even participating in the labor force in April. And that's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. What jobs are these people coming for that we have 92 million Americans out of work? And I'm sorry, I understand the humanitarian and the compassion, but you are to represent us. And we have children, and we have elderly people who have immune deficiency disorders. These are people that are coming in with diseases, leprosy, tuberculosis, polio. You need to represent us and help us get our city councils and our county governments to say, not here. And that's what we need you to do for us.
Thanks, Gary, for your comments. And I am seeking to represent this district, and I appreciate that input. And that's why I went down there to see it for myself. I didn't just want to believe the media reports. I wanted to confirm them. I wanted to see whether what was going on. Thank you. I think we had one over here next.
David,
Yes.
if you have them line up, you walk back to where Michael is for questions, that would be easier.
Okay, good.
So if you just
Thank you, Ken.
go line up over there.
Well, it may be hard for some people to, okay. Yeah, if y'all could just line up in the back, then we'll do this orderly. Thank you.
Hey, I'm a student of history, and one thing I know is that one of the big reasons why the Western Roman Empire collapsed was they had an immigration problem, and immigration overwhelmed assimilation. What we're seeing here in our country, in our state, is the same thing. There are places in Tyler that I could drive through every day that I can't read the billboards. And every time I call somewhere, it's press 1 for English. This is a problem of assimilation. And we really need the sanctuary cities to stop. We really need